May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. You may be seated. Well, when the Greeks come to Jesus, they have a simple, straightforward request. Let us see him. It's the only time in any of the Gospels that someone of that national origin has asked to meet with Jesus. But as Minyan's been teaching us in Sunday school class, Greeks are certainly not a new or small presence here in the region. Ever since Alexander the Great conquered the region, Greeks have been present in Palestine. And those Greeks have been tremendously influential as well. They governed the region time to time, but more importantly, they exported their philosophy, their language, their art, their history. The cultural crossover caused no small amount of conflict, but it did eventually settle down, mostly. Today's gospel reading suggests that the influence doesn't go just one way, though. The Greeks are here to celebrate Passover. They're not here simply to watch. They're not here as religious tourists. They're here to worship. And as worshipers, they're aware of what's been going on in Jewish religious life. They know about this Jesus. They know about the conflict that surrounds him, how the people leading the Passover celebrations have also been trying to discredit Jesus, but he's overcome them at every turn. No doubt, Jesus' triumphal entry has been the talk about town too and generated no small amount of interest. And so this group of Greeks want to meet the man, the myth, the legend. To arrange the audience, they approach one of the two disciples with a Greek name, Andrew. With a name like that, maybe he'll speak the language well enough to arrange the meeting. Now, no telling if Andrew really is fluent, but they find a way to communicate well enough for him to approach Jesus and say, there's a group of Greeks, of Gentiles, outsiders, who want to meet him. Again, it is a simple request. The content is direct and unmistakable, and Jesus blows the request off. There are numerous ways not to answer a question that you are asked. You can respond with a question of your own. You can ignore the question entirely. But Jesus employs the tactic we're most accustomed to seeing in presidential debates. He changes the topic. Now, unlike our politicians, when he does that, Jesus isn't trying to hide from something he doesn't want to talk about. He just has something all-consuming on his mind that everything goes back to. They want to see me, he wonders. Well, soon everyone will see me. They'll see him lifted up, and as he rises, all people, Jew, Greek, Roman, Gaul, all people, he says, will be drawn to him. People will no longer have to ask the question like the Greeks asked, can we see Jesus? Yes. Yes, you can see Jesus. He's right there glorifying God. He's right there doing as the Father wills. He's right there for all to see, driving out the rulers of the world and installing new leadership. He's right there for all to see, suffering and dying. It's not a straightforward logic that rulership, that godship should be seen and recognized most clearly as the suffering and the dying. But to those whom God calls, God gives the eyes to see and the mind to understand. This is the law that as Jeremiah writes, the law that's written on our hearts so that we may see and know and recognize God. God has been revealed to us and revealed as the one who suffers and dies. Perhaps more importantly, God has been revealed to us and is being revealed in those who are suffering and dying. Like so many of you, I was raised being taught that all people are made in God's image and should be treated as manifestations of that image. All people are products of and worthy of respect. All people are products of and worthy of love. And yes, all people are made in God's image. Yet, some people reveal that image and call me back to God more potently than others. There are some people we can look at and say, there is God. There I see Jesus. There I know the Lord. When you see a child who needs new shoes for the feet, there you see Jesus. When you see a family in need of food, there you see Jesus. When you see someone struck by disaster and in need of relief, there you see Jesus. When you see someone alone and in need of a caring hand, there you see Jesus. And throughout the year, our congregation sees and serves Jesus in each of these places. When the outreach committee calls, we find a way to respond, and it is a beautiful thing to see. But there are obstacles that try to blind us to seeing Jesus, because where we see Jesus, where we identify Jesus, where we stand with Jesus matters. Because where we see Jesus, Jesus is being lifted up. Where we stand alongside Jesus, the powers of the world are being driven away and into dust so that love may win the day. So power tempts us to limit where we are willing to recognize Jesus in his suffering. It tempts us to see Christ in some places, but not in others. To see Christ as some who suffer and not others. It tempts us to believe that some who suffer are Christ, and some are simply getting what's coming to them. Some who are dying are Christ, and some who are dying deserve it. Our challenge is to remember to follow Christ wherever Christ goes, to honor Christ wherever he is revealed, to serve Christ whoever and wherever he is found. In our world today, for example, power tempts us to see only the frightened Israeli hostage in Palestine who needs returned to his family, because then power can be exercised bringing him home. Or power tempts us to see only the Gazan mother weeping for her lost child, because then power can avenge the loss. But Christ invites us to see himself lifted up in the suffering of both. For then, and only then, can love drive out the devilish powers of the world. Only then do we get creative enough to find a solution deeper than power's temptation to dropping bombs or strapping them to your chest. In their book, Resident Aliens, Christian ethicist Stanley Hauerwast and Methodist priest William Willimon recall a story of teaching students when another conflict broke out in the Middle East. Both authors being notably pacifist, the students asked them, well, how are Christians supposed to respond in this conflict? Since it seemed obvious to the students that only one side could be in the right and only one side could need our support. It was supposed to be a kind of gotcha moment where the two pacifists had to admit their belief that Christianity and going to war were incompatible with one another, and yet war was the only real solution to the problem. Instead, the authors, like Jesus to the Greeks, didn't take the question head on. They responded wishing that Christians of all stripes could simply team up to flood the region, flood with people, with manpower, with aid, and relief from the war that the powers were raging. Aha! The students responded. That's not a solution. The government won't give you visas, won't let you get on planes to go to that country. You can't get there. But rather than being God, the authors opined the failure of imagination that could not see a way around those laws, and the failure of courage that would let some lesser law win the day. The only law that mattered, that matters, is the law written on our hearts. The law that lets us recognize God freely. The law that reminds us that as he suffers, Christ is drawing all people to himself. The law that reminds us wherever we witness suffering, we are being invited to serve Christ. For though suffering and death seem to have the upper hand, Christ is being lifted up, and power is being driven out by his love. Thanks be to God. Amen.